Picking up with Chapter 20. Chapter 20 is on mobility and restoring the resident's mobility, and it really talks about two key things. The first is pressure ulcer formation, and so be thinking about ways that you can prevent the formation of pressure ulcers. We've talked a little bit in previous chapters about turning the resident every 2 hours. We've also talked about toileting the resident every 2 hours and making sure that the resident's skin is clean and dry. You also want to make sure that your bed linens are nice and straight and that it's not kind of lumping or clumping under the resident, because laying on a lump of bed linens for an extended period of time could also be problematic. Towards the end of the chapter, it starts to talk about range of motion, and we learned the abbreviations AROM and PROM, where AROM is active range of motion and then PROM is passive range of motion. Active would be a resident who can do it on their own, whereas passive, like my mannequin here, he's unable to lift his own arm, so I have to do that for him. And so when you're working with residents and you're assisting them with range of motion, I always say you should start at the head and come down. And sometimes you'll see, as maybe an activities director or a restorative aide, they're required to assist with the range of motion activities on a daily basis. And I've definitely seen it where the restorative aide is unavailable, the activities person is unavailable, so they grab a CNA off the floor and say, hey, can you lead exercises today? So if you start at the head and come down, you'll do basic exercises that don't require the older adult to hyperextend their neck or really stretch their limbs further than the point of resistance. And so remembering, we never go past the point of resistance. So a basic head exercise might be chin or head up and down, tucking your chin and going nice and slow for the older adult, or a head tilt. And again, stopping in the center and not overextending. And then we can go to our shoulders and bring our shoulders up and down. And then we can go to our arms and flex and extend, where flexing is bending and extending is straightening. You can do your fingers, where you touch your fingers to your thumb, or do spirit fingers and kind of get them to stretch out their fingers that way. You can also ride your motorcycle, which is doing like the wrist motion to exercise and work the range of motion in their wrist. As you go lower, you can get to the feet. If I have older adults sitting in the wheelchair, I like to have them do high marches as they're sitting in the wheelchair and then point and flex their foot. So if a resident is bedbound, you may have to assist them with the range of motion. So they may do more of the passive range of motion. And usually I don't like to work a whole lot of someone else's neck. So you can do some basic things if they're able to do it, maybe independently with their neck. But I will definitely use their arms and do some flexion and extension of the arm. You can do the same thing with the wrist, which my mannequin won't do. And then the same thing for their legs, maybe flexing and extending their leg, supporting the foot and the knee behind. Same thing with the ankle. The thing to remember and to not get overwhelmed by this is we are not physical therapists, and we are not expected to do aggressive workouts on our residents. The goal is to make sure that the joints in the body stay in motion. What you'll see when we don't do adequate range of motion is that patients start to get contractures, so their hands will lock up, their elbow will lock up. And so we want to avoid those contractures if at all possible. I've definitely seen residents where their knees are contracted and their elbows are contracted, and they almost end up in this fetal position. And a lot of that, I think, can be really prevented or limited if we continue with adequate range of motion. So you will have a restorative aide on the floor who assists and kind of takes the lead in range of motion, but really all CNAs are expected to know how and to contribute to the daily range of motion routines. So I just want to show you how it is possible for an older adult to engage in range of motion activities from the wheelchair. So of course we can work our head with no problem, even in the seated position. And so you can do that with the resident. They could even do their shoulders sitting down And you could roll your shoulders forward, nice and slow, and then backwards, nice and slow. Sometimes we give them weights and they can lift the weights from their wheelchair. Of course, they can do their fingers from the wheelchair. And then for the feet, what you can see is that they can march here in their wheelchair, and they can also do foot circles or leg circles. They can point and flex their toe. So you're able to do a lot of the same exercises whether the resident is standing up or sitting down.